Welcome to the Inside Elections podcast. In this episode, how will President Donald Trump's legal problems affect races down the ballot?
And what's the fallout from the Supreme Court's redistricting decision on the fight for the House?
Which Olympic gold medal winning figure skater is running for Congress?
And finally, Nathan can't stop talking about sports from his old high school.
Here's episode 1 of the Inside Elections podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the first ever Inside Elections podcast, where we analyze elections in a nonpartisan, data-driven, and accessible way. I'm Nathan Gonzales, editor and publisher of Inside Elections, and I grew up in Oregon's 6th District.
I'm Jacob Rubashkin, reporter and analyst for Inside Elections, and I grew up in Maryland's 8th District.
Hey everyone, I'm Erin Covey. I am also a reporter and analyst for Inside Elections, and I actually grew up in 9 different congressional districts across the country, I think. Not quite sure.
Erin, that needs a little bit of explanation. 9 congressional districts?
Yeah, so I was born in Texas's 20th district, which is the district currently held by Joaquin Castro, and then grew up in a military family. And so I moved around quite a bit across several different states and in multiple places within those states. So I think the total is 9, but again, I'm not totally sure.
Well, that makes more sense. And despite the haircut that I got yesterday, I am not planning on joining the military. But Jacob, you grew up in slightly less moving. Where's Maryland's 8th District?
So Maryland's 8th District is right next to D.C., in fact, about 10 miles away from the Capitol building itself, mostly Montgomery County in the D.C. suburbs.
And I grew up in Dallas, Oregon, which is in Oregon's new 6th District. It's in the Mid-Willamette Valley, about 13 miles west of Salem. And everyone is probably going to get more sports coverage from my old high school than you would ever have wanted. Before we get to our big 3 stories of this episode, what's one important development that folks should not miss? Jacob, why don't you start us off?
So Delaware Democrat Lisa Blunt Rochester formally announced her bid for the United States Senate to succeed Tom Carper, who is retiring at the end of his term next year. Blunt Rochester is the state's at-large congresswoman currently, and she isn't expected to receive any significant opposition in the Democratic primary or in the general election next November.
And she would be the 3rd Black woman elected to the Senate?
Yes, after Carol Moseley Braun and Kamala Harris.
Erin, what's one development people should not miss?
Yeah, so in other Senate news, Doug Ducey, the former governor of Arizona, announced that he is not running for the Senate in 2024, which for those of y'all who have been following Arizona politics closely shouldn't be a huge surprise. Republicans tried to recruit him to run for the Senate last cycle, but he decided not to run. And he has also come out pretty strongly against former President Trump on issues related to Trump's attempts to overturn the 2020 election results. And so because of that, he has alienated quite a few Arizona Republicans, and he would have a lot of trouble winning a primary.
And we're still waiting on independent Sinema, Kyrsten Sinema, to whether she's going to run for re-election. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. So she hasn't announced if she's running. The only major candidates we have at this point are Ruben Gallego, who is running for the Democratic nomination, and then a couple of other Republicans.
And Metro Council President Lynn Peterson and State Rep Janelle Bynum, both Democrats, announced their campaigns in Oregon's 5th District, setting up what's likely to be a competitive primary with 2022 Democratic nominee Jamie McLeod Skinner in one of the most competitive districts in the country. This is a district that stretches from the Portland suburbs down to Central Oregon. Used to be held by Kurt Schrader, and it's an important primary because Republican Congresswoman Lori Chavez de Remer is one of the most vulnerable Republican candidates in the country. This is a race that we have rated as a toss-up and is a race to watch all the way to next November. The bottom line is that everything is on the line in 2024. Republicans need a net gain of 2 seats for a majority in the Senate. They can control the Senate, though, by gaining 1 seat and winning the White House because the new vice president could break 50-50 ties. Democrats need a net gain of 5 seats to get to the House majority, and we expect a competitive presidential race no matter who the 2 nominees are. The Inside Elections podcast is sponsored by George Washington University's Graduate School of Political Management, or GSPM. The GSPM program offers master's degrees in legislative affairs and political management with in-person and online class schedules designed for the working professional. The program is not just a sponsor, but I'm also a graduate. It was an opportunity for me to take what I was learning in the classroom and directly apply it to my day job of analyzing campaigns. So please click on the link in the chatter and check out what the GSPM program has to offer. Let's dive into our top 3 stories. The first story, Trump's mounting legal problems.
Today, an indictment was unsealed, charging Donald J. Trump with felony violations of our national security laws, as well as participating in a conspiracy to obstruct justice. It's very important for me to note that the defendants in this case must be presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. To that end, my office will seek a speedy trial in this matter, consistent with the public interest and the rights of the accused.
That was DOJ Special Counsel Jack Smith. The former president faces a 37-count indictment over his mishandling of classified documents and obstruction of justice when the FBI tried to recover them. This is in addition to the 34-count indictment Trump faces in New York related to a cash payment he made to a porn star before the 2016 election, and a jury finding Trump liable for sexual abuse and defamation in a civil case. Trump could also face another series of indictments in Georgia for trying to overturn the results of the 2020 election.
So what does this mean for 2024, looking at races for House and Senate?
Well, setting aside the legal and even the political part of it, what I'm focused on right now that doesn't get enough attention is the timing. First of all, we don't know when these trials are going to take place, how these trials are going to play out. But what we do know is that the legal problems are sucking up oxygen. It is going to be extremely difficult for candidates that are already running, incumbents that are already running, to try to get their message out or to talk about anything else when Trump and his legal problems are constantly in the news. I think it's also having a chilling factor on the cycle where there's so much uncertainty with his legal status and what's happening at the top of the ticket that some Republicans may not be sure if they want to get into the race because they're a little bit leery of joining a ticket or joining a ballot when he's at the top. But Erin, what are you focused on when it comes to Trump's legal problems in 2024?
Oh my gosh. I mean, that is such an open question at this point. I think, like you said, Nathan, it seems like right now I've been thinking about how it's affecting which candidates are going to run and which ones may be less likely and more likely to wait it out until another cycle when they don't have to run with Trump on the ticket, most likely. I mean, at this point, he is the prohibitive favorite to win the Republican nomination. Democrats and Republicans are pretty much on the same page about that. And even if that does change, he's still going to be a front runner throughout this primary process. And whoever is running down ballot in these races for House or even Senate are going to have to contend with what the presidential candidates like Trump and the other Republican presidential candidates are talking about. And so all of these folks who are looking at running in the Senate, and particularly in these House races where it's even harder to kind of establish your own political identity that's separate from just being a generic Republican or a generic Democrat, are really going to struggle to not have to just kind of focus on whatever is going on with Trump and all of his legal issues, regardless of how they end up playing out.
Right. I think we underestimate as the drip, drip, drip of legal news comes out that it provides more opportunities for reporters to then ask candidates, well, what do you
Yeah.
think? Do you agree or do you disagree with this? But Jacob, what are you focused on with the down ballot effect?
I think that there's going to be a tremendous amount of attention paid, obviously, to the presidential race, and that does crowd out members of Congress. I think that, and congressional candidates, not incumbents, certainly. The thing that comes to mind for me though is less about kind of the topic of the day and more just the dynamics of a presidential election when Donald Trump is on the ballot. I mean, we saw this happen in 2020 where we had this massive turnout surge, obviously in the COVID pandemic as well, and increased ballot access in a lot of states because of the pandemic. But I think that we've got a number of freshman members, certainly the Republican majority, obviously built on freshman members that were elected to Congress in 2022, who haven't had to run for Congress with Donald Trump on the ticket, haven't had to live in that kind of electorate where 65% of the population is showing up to vote. So I do kind of wonder how much is about Trump as kind of the specific legal challenges, and how much of it is just about Trump as this all-encompassing figure who inspires really intense feelings, not just in his supporters, but in his detractors as well.
Yeah, and to your point, Jacob, I mean, 18 of these Republicans who are up for re-election are running in districts that Biden won in 2020. And so even if Biden performs the same as he did in that cycle, it's likely that at least a dozen and a half Republican members are going to have to run ahead of the Republican nominee for president, which is not an easy task, and is usually something that a handful of members of Congress, at least at the House level, are able to accomplish in presidential cycles.
And Republicans who want to turn the chapter from Trump or don't think he would be the strongest general election nominee, I don't think have factored in what happens if he's not the nominee, because he's not going to go away quietly, right? He's still going to be giving interviews and on social media and saying things. And if he causes 5% of Republican voters to stay home or not vote because he says it's rigged, and he's angry and they support him more than any other party or institution, then that has a tremendous impact, not just on the presidential race, but on some of these down ballot races where Republican candidates need independent voters in order to either get reelected or to win their races.
Yeah, I think it's a really risky situation that Republicans are heading toward with Trump as their likely standard bearer, and I do think a lot of the consternation is papered over by not just 2020 and these false theories that he won the election, but I think honestly the more important race when it comes to voters' perception of Trump is 2016, because that was really the moment where not everyone, but a lot of people were saying, Trump can't win, right? There was a real perception in a lot of the media, in a lot of the punditry that Hillary Clinton was a shoo-in and that there was no way Trump could win. And certainly he wasn't going to, be a help to any of the Republicans running down ballot. And what we saw happen was Trump prove the doubters wrong. And so I do think that when voters pose the question to themselves, can Donald Trump win an election? They think back to 2016 and the unexpected outcome there. And so they're less receptive to the arguments that some Republicans in Congress and in the presidential race, like Ron DeSantis, are making, saying, oh, Donald Trump can't win an election. Voters are sitting there saying, that's what you all were saying 8 years ago, and you were wrong. Why should we believe you now?
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. That's a great point. And this is an issue that's going to keep coming up. I'm sure we're going to keep talking about, because President Trump is likely to get indicted again in Georgia, and then we're going to have so many simultaneous court cases going on. The same dynamic is going to be playing out. But let's move on to our next topic. Our second story is the Supreme Court and redistricting.
Yeah, so Nathan, about 2 weeks ago, the Supreme Court ruled that Alabama's new congressional map violates the Voting Rights Act by diluting the political power of Black voters in the state. So this came as a pretty big surprise, because the conservatives who currently have a majority in the Supreme Court have typically chosen to weaken the Voting Rights Act in previous cases. And so a lot of folks were expecting that they would uphold Alabama's new congressional map, but that was not the case. And so now the state is going to have to draw a new map and create a second congressional district where Black voters are in the majority, or at least in the plurality. So currently the state has 7 congressional districts, and only one of these districts is majority Black. And because of the political makeup of the state, it's likely that this second district would elect a Democrat to Congress. And so this one decision could have a significant impact on the battle for control of the House when Republicans only have a 5-seat majority at this point.
So, Erin, you took the lead on this particular story for us in the newsletter. What is the timeline for a new map in Alabama and potentially new maps elsewhere?
Yeah, so a federal court has given the Alabama legislature till July 21st to draw a new map. That's a really quick turnaround, but the filing deadline for candidates who are running in 2024 in Alabama is in November. And so the state has to have a new map approved by then. And if the legislature doesn't draw a new map or isn't able to come to a consensus on a map by that date, then the court has the ability to appoint a special master to draw the map, which is a tactic that we saw used in a couple of states last cycle during the redistricting processes. And then for the other states, it's a little more unclear. There are similar cases in Louisiana and in Georgia under the Voting Rights Act that could affect their maps now that the Supreme Court has ruled the way it did in Alabama. And so in Louisiana and Georgia, depending on the timeline for these cases, there's a chance that we could see 2 new majority Black districts drawn in these states, and those would likely elect Democrats. And then Texas also has several voting rights lawsuits against their congressional map. And those lawsuits are not as far along as they are in Louisiana and in Georgia. And so it's less likely that the state would have a new map by 2024, but there certainly is a chance that there could be a new map in 2026.
And Jacob, what are the chances of, I know that there are some Democrats who think that there is an opportunity to gain ground in New York and Wisconsin. What are the chances of new maps there? And does the decision, the Supreme Court decision, impact those processes at all?
The Supreme Court does not really impact those decisions because it just specifically dealt with this question of racial disparities in voting power, and particularly kind of compact populations. And the questions about the maps in Wisconsin and New York are not race-based by and large. There are hopes among Democrats that those 2 maps might be redrawn, right? So Democrats retook the Wisconsin Supreme Court in an election this spring. There is a lawsuit working its way through the system there. Some Democrats are hopeful that either the 1st or the 3rd district could get redrawn to be more Democratic, potentially both redrawn there to be more competitive. In New York, there's a similar case. New York had a very messy redistricting process last year that ultimately ended with an out-of-state special master being brought in by a court to redraw the map that the legislature had drawn. New York also saw a change in the composition of its highest court, confusingly called the Court of Appeals. And Democrats are hopeful that the new justices on that court will be more amenable to their argument that the map should be redrawn. But we're still quite a ways away. There was an intermediate court hearing on that case. That court has to decide. Whatever that decision is will get appealed to the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals has to decide, and that restarts the whole process. There's a commission that's involved, and then the legislature ultimately will take their turn at drawing a new map. And depending on how aggressive Democrats want to be, they could make life very difficult for any of the 6 or multiple of the 6 Republicans who hold seats that Joe Biden would have won in the 2020 election in New York.
Well, and I don't want to also forget to mention the redistricting situations in North Carolina and Ohio, where Republicans control the processes. Both of these states are expected to have new maps in 2024. And in North Carolina, because of the way the state's current congressional map is drawn and what Republicans are expected to do there, the VRA ruling from the Supreme Court could actually affect how Republicans in the state legislature in North Carolina are able to draw that new map. So they might not be able to draw as aggressive as a gerrymander as they were expected to draw before this ruling.
And if people haven't Googled the North Carolina Speaker of the State House and some of the situation controversy that he's involved in, I might encourage you to do that. Maybe be careful on a work computer. But it's, I guess, when you boil it down, redistricting, do we think that one party will have a significant net of seats when you factor in all of the redistricting stuff that we've just talked about, or is it going to be a wash and it'll be a straight fight for the House? Does one party have an advantage?
I think it probably comes down to what happens in New York. I think, the prior to this Supreme Court case, I think we probably would have given the edge to Republicans, but the domino effect in Alabama, Louisiana, Georgia. I know that there's a case in Arkansas even with a similar kind of argument there. There's another related but distinct case in South Carolina. I think those probably counteract a lot of what we were going to see in North Carolina and Ohio. And then, how aggressive are Democrats in New York, I think is the final piece to the puzzle, but we're just so far away, and it's dependent, not on legislators whose behavior we can, somewhat understand, but judges who oftentimes, as we just saw 2 weeks ago, can surprise you.
Right. Erin, what do you think?
Yeah. I agree with Jacob. I think it really comes down to what happens in New York. It's a little more predictable in North Carolina, where Republicans are expected to draw a map where they could net anywhere from 3 to 4 seats just based on that new map alone. Again, that may not be the case now that the Supreme Court has ruled the way that it did on the VRA. But I think there's still a situation where you could see Republicans pick up 3 different seats just from redistricting alone in North Carolina. And then Ohio is a little less clear too, because under the current map, Democrats represent the 3 most competitive congressional districts. And so even if the Republicans don't make any significant changes to the map, and they're not expected to make aggressive changes to the Ohio map, which is just based on the state's constitution, has a little more specific rules around redistricting than North Carolina's constitution. But even if Republicans kind of leave the map the way it currently is, there's a really good chance that they could flip all 3 of these seats since they're all held by Democrats. And then, like Jacob said, because of the ruling on the Alabama case, we could see anywhere from 1 to maybe 3 new Democratic-leaning districts come up in these states in the Deep South, in Alabama, Louisiana, Georgia, and maybe even Arkansas. But yeah, it really all comes down to this decision in New York.
And I think one of the points that I think has gotten a little lost in the conversation about Alabama is, we've seen a lot of legal scholars weigh in on the case and basically say that this was a victory for voting rights advocates, but it also was merely maintaining the status quo in terms of how the court was interpreting the Voting Rights Act and the case Jingles that was the precedent here, that the court declined to overturn that case and reinterpret the Voting Rights Act like Alabama wanted it to. And while that's the legal upshot of this, I do think that it's important to remember how different and not status quo the political upshot of this case is, right? I mean, this has been the way that southern states have done redistricting since the 90s, right? Is they couldn't have no black majority districts, so they had one. And we see this in Mississippi and in Louisiana and in Alabama and in South Carolina. This is just how it's done and how it's been done for the last 30 years. And so even though legally this is a continuation, it's not an expansion, from a political standpoint, there really is a shift here in the understanding of how states have to draw these congressional districts in order to comport with existing law.
And when I hear, as we go through all of this, and this is my 3rd redistricting cycle of reporting, and I'm skeptical that there's going to be a lot of new maps. It just sounds like a lot of steps that have to happen in a very short amount of time and involving legal process. So we'll see how many new maps we have in 2024. Erin, you mentioned potentially some of them reaching into 2026, and it could be mid-decade redistricting. So we'll be covering this. We'll be covering this throughout. But let's move on to our third story.
Mathematically, it had to be perfect. Mathematically, Sarah Hughes had to win the long, and Michelle Kwan had to be third in the long in order for this result, and that's exactly what happened. Third-ranked woman on a three-man team wins the Olympic gold medal for the United States. Wow, what a finish.
16-year-old Sarah Hughes, Great Neck, New York, with an upset of Olympian proportions, takes the gold medal.
Our third story is Olympic figure skating and Congress.
So New York's 4th congressional district is one of Democrats' best pickup opportunities next year. The Long Island district is currently represented by a Republican, Anthony D'Esposito, but it voted for Biden by 14 points in 2020, 57 to 43%, which makes it exactly the kind of seat that Democrats have to win back in order to reclaim the majority. But it does look like that they will have to sort through a primary before they can take on D'Esposito in the general election. 2022 nominee Laura Gillen, who's the former town supervisor of Hempstead, which is the vast majority of this district, is running for the seat. But Olympian Sarah Hughes, who won a gold medal in figure skating at the 2002 Games in Salt Lake City, is also preparing to join the race.
So, Jacob, you wrote a long piece on this race in the latest newsletter, in the latest Inside Elections. What are Hughes' chances of actually making it through the primary, even though she's the name that some people may have heard of most?
So Hughes, who has, to be clear, not officially entered the race. She has filed, but she has not formally launched her campaign or really done any sort of campaigning. It is a real underdog to begin with. It's always going to be hard to defeat a previous cycle's nominee, someone like Laura Gillen. And additionally, Laura Gillen has been around in the politics of the South Shore of Long Island for the last decade. She won her town supervisor race in 2017, was the first Democrat to win that seat in over 100 years. On the ballot again in 2019, very narrow loss. Then again, of course, in the primary and in the general. So Democrats have seen her name on the ballot any number of times over the last couple of years. And so while Hughes does have a degree of celebrity, she is a hometown hero for much of Long Island. She is not familiar to the politics of the district. And so she will be starting from a less advantageous position than Gillen, who already has that political infrastructure and name ID built up. So, Hughes will have to raise a lot of money. She will have to try and tap into the goodwill stemming back to her 2002 gold medal run, which was an upset. She was a teenager. It came right in the wake of 9/11 when New York was really still reeling from those attacks. And so she's got some cards to play here, but when she formally gets in the race later in the summer is going to have her work cut out for her.
What has she been doing since then?
A lot of things. So after she retired from skating, she remained very involved both in the Olympics or as an organization, in the Women's Sports Federation, founded by tennis superstar Billie Jean King. She has been involved in local skating efforts. She went to law school, got a JD. She's got a great pedigree, Yale, University of Pennsylvania. She's currently actually pursuing an MBA at Stanford. Part of the reason why she hasn't begun her campaign yet was because she was still taking midterms and finals until a couple of weeks ago. But she has practiced law for a little bit as a corporate attorney at a New York firm, Proskauer and Rose. And is currently in business school. So she's got her hands in a lot of different fields at the moment. And it will be interesting to see whether she can tie all of that together to a compelling message for her congressional bid.
She's collecting all the Ivy League Infinity Stones, I see.
And I feel like Hughes is the type of, I don't know, celebrity, maybe that's the right word, where she may not be a name that you immediately remember, but if you see the clip on YouTube or you listen to it, then the memories start coming back. We don't have to go through exactly where the two of you were in 2002. But we were probably in different places in life. But I don't know, had either of you heard of Sarah Hughes as we started talking about this race as she came onto the scene?
No, not really. This is where I admit that I wasn't paying all that much attention to the 2002 Olympics in Salt Lake City, but that's just me.
She hasn't reached Mary Lou Retton status, but I don't know. Maybe the two of you, we're reaching even further back.
Look, I do think though, none of us are in the district, and what her bid is gonna rely on is the goodwill from Long Islanders, right? And can she really, take that local girl made good angle and tap into the feelings of the electorate there, and especially the older electorate that both remembers that Olympics and votes more regularly in primaries.
I mean, it seems like Olympians have done pretty well when they've run for Congress. Maybe not as well as astronauts, but like you had Monica Tranel in Montana last cycle. I'm sure that both of you can add more names to that list.
Well, she lost.
Yeah, but
she came close, but she did win her primary, which is the first step for Hughes. The other Olympian that comes to mind is Olympic bobsledder Herschel Walker, better known for some other athletic feats of his. But he also, won his primary convincingly, clearly off the strength of his bobsledding run. I think at the 1994 Olympics, but I'm not sure. I don't know, Nathan. Can you think of other Olympians in recent memory who have tried or made it to Congress?
There was an Olympian who ran. Gosh, I do this for a living, so I should have these names. But he was running in Colorado, I want to say, but it was in one of those events with multiple events, like you're riding horses and you're shooting and you're.
Eli Bremer.
Yeah,
Eli
that's right.
Bremer. Who was running for Senate, right, and didn't make it out of the convention out there in Colorado.
Right. Yeah.
He was a pentathlete.
Good pull. Look at this. You're like
a heptathlete,
resident Olympic expert.
Yeah,
we're giving you a new title after this,
Nathan.
Jacob.
One of us wrote an article about Olympians running for Congress. I don't think it was me, but I think I do remember reading it.
It was
I do too. That's why I was asking. I remember.
And I'm getting so old. I'm getting so old that I forget even things that I wrote just a few weeks ago. Yeah, the key is whether Hughes can transition, that celebrity status into real support and real votes, because ultimately that's what matters.
I think that her struggle will be in part, at least, the celebrity can be an advantage. It's obviously a very strong card she has to play, but it also has its downsides. And we see this in her kind of quasi launch, right? Not every candidate, when they file for office, is going to get stories written about them in CNN, Washington Post, New York Times. Every major media outlet covered her filing in the race. She was still at Stanford. She wasn't actually ready to jump into that contest, but was faced with this kind of deluge of immediate news coverage. She will have to contend with that additional spotlight. We saw something very similar out in California where Ben Savage, the actor, is running for Congress to succeed Adam Schiff. Very similar. I think he was on CNN the morning he announced, and he is a real non-factor in the race. And so when you're a celebrity and you jump in with all of this national attention, you got to remember that the election is still won on the ground. These primaries are local affairs, and you can have a lot of stories in big outlets, but they don't necessarily get you over the finish line or even get you to the starting line.
Well, I want to save that Ben Savage race for another episode, because I want to have an in-depth discussion on Boy Meets World versus Saved by the Bell. What was the better show? And we can go episode by episode through that.
I think that would be a monologue.
Oh, brutal. But all right, that's but those are we'll be following all of these races to completion next year. And finally, our last segment, Look What I Found, where we highlight something new we've stumbled across. It could be political, sports, music, something else entirely. You never know what you're going to get with this segment. Erin, what did you find?
So I started watching a new show with my roommates that's called Mrs. Davis, which is basically about this nun who is on a mission to defeat this algorithm that has taken over the earth because she thinks that the algorithm is responsible for her father's death. So it's actually weirder than it sounds. I'm like on episode 4. Yes.
Weirder than it sounds. Okay.
Yeah. It a lot of twists and turns. It's very quirky. It's fun though. It's like keeping me entertained. I normally don't go for sci-fi, but I'm enjoying it. So I think I'd recommend it. We'll see how it ends.
How many episodes are available at this point?
Oh, I think it's just like 7 or 8 episodes. It's pretty short. Maybe 10 max, but it's not a super long series.
Jacob, what did you find?
So I found a show on Netflix, a new show called The Night Agent. It's a thriller about an FBI agent who finds himself wrapped up in a vast conspiracy. It's pretty silly, but it's enjoyable, and it's a real kind of throwback to those, espionage thrillers of the 80s and 90s. And I appreciated that it even had a plot point that revolved around some FEC filings, though they didn't quite get the look of the FEC website exactly right.
Hold on a second, Jacob. Are you sure? Are you writing this in spare time? Is this your side hustle? Writing shows?
No. I stand with the WGA. No, I'm not writing. I'm not writing any Netflix shows in my spare time. But I did laugh out loud. It wasn't a funny moment, but when I saw one of the characters say, do the you better take a look at this, and she turned her laptop around and it was the FEC website. I couldn't help but laugh because that's how I feel most days when I also troll around the FEC looking for vast global conspiracies.
I'm glad someone's glamorizing our lifestyle.
Erin, would this be a candidate for you and your roommates to watch? Would this check enough boxes?
Maybe. I think so. I don't actually watch a lot of like political shows because I like to not think about it in my free time. But yeah, it could be fun. It's a candidate.
You're too busy creating political shows, like the Inside Elections podcast. Well, I found that the Dallas High School Dragons won the 2023 state championship in Oregon. First ever state championship for the softball team. Yes, it is the high school that I went to. Yes, I still pay attention and care, which might say something about me. I'm even wearing for those of you watching on YouTube, a shirt from the Dallas wrestling team when they won the state championship. So just a warning that you will probably hear more about how the Dallas Dragons are doing because I'm stuck in the past in some ways, but I'm excited. I'm excited for them.
Nathan, do you still have your jersey from your football days?
Oh, Jacob, we don't want to turn off listeners and viewers this early. This is only the first episode. It may
is
or
it
may
framed on the other side of the camera?
Framed. It may be in a closet at my parents' house, but I haven't seen it in years. But I think it may exist. As people may notice from my Twitter profile, I was, I think, one of the top rated backup quarterbacks in the Mid Willamette Valley in the mid 1990s. So, for those of you who can't pick up the sarcasm, backup, that's how good I was. So no, but it's great. It's fun. I'm happy for the kids. So that's all the time we have. We got smarter about Trump's impact on congressional races with his mounting legal problems. We plotted the path ahead on redistricting in the wake of the Supreme Court decision, and we learned why it might be hard for an Olympic figure skater to end up in Congress, and that's all in the context of a very competitive 2024 election cycle. Thank you for joining us. At Inside Elections, we provide nonpartisan analysis of congressional, presidential, and gubernatorial races. With a combination of reporting and data, we break down the key races and bring valuable context to complex elections. Go to InsideElections.com to subscribe to our bi-weekly newsletter. We have individual subscriptions as well as group packages that are tailor-made for association and corporate PACs. In case you're not familiar with how podcasts work, if you're listening and you like this episode, please subscribe to the podcast and rate us on your favorite platform. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit subscribe as well. Leave us a comment, and we will do our best to respond. If you didn't like this episode, please email 2002 bronze medalist Michelle Kwan. We also wanted to thank our producers, Alan Tazinski and Melissa Lenner of Pretty Easy Podcast, and our associate producer, Conrad Tolosa. Please come back and join us again.